Line standing by, John Abraham, physicist at the University of St. Thomas School of Engineering in Minnesota. Mr. Abraham, welcome back to America's Radio News.
Well, thanks for having me on, Chris and Lori. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Wanted to talk to you about, of course, this is something that probably passed your desk, some controversy being raised by the BBC. Now, the allegations are being made by the man-made global warming skeptic scientific community that the BBC is taking too much licensing with how they cover global warming issues. And basically, to surmise this, the BBC is basically saying, look, there's so much overwhelming consensus, there's that word again, about man-made global warming being true, that skeptics ought not be given the same type of weight in their stories. As a matter of fact, the BBC doesn't feel they should be constrained anymore to get the other side of the debate. What do you say about that? Do you think that that dissenters from man-made global warming should be denied a voice?
No, I don't think anyone should be denied a voice, Chris. And the point you raised is a good one. I haven't read the BBC article, but I would suggest an appropriate level of balance. I mean, there are, for example, medical doctors who don't think that the HIV virus causes AIDS. And there are some people who think the earth is flat. And they are in the vast minority. And, of course, their voices should be heard, but they should be appropriate to the quality of the voice and the number of voices. And what we're finding around this country, and by the way, I wish I was in the studio with you guys today because I bet you're in sweaters. I mean, are you guys wearing sweaters today? Because it's frigid there.
It's very cold, yes.
Look, compared to last week, didn't you guys hit heat indexes of 116 or 118?
124, I believe, one day it was.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I guess I guess I'm undervaluing this global warming. Look, people around the country are finding that climate change is happening in their daily lives. And let's just think about this summer. I mean, this summer has been really strange. We've got droughts in Texas. We've got floods in the Mississippi and Missouri River Valley, floods up in North Dakota, and you guys are sweltering in 104 degree heat indexes.
Right.
And what we're seeing is that climate change causes real problems around the world and in our country. It can make you guys uncomfortable, but it can be downright deadly in other parts of the country. I just found a stat today that in Texas, this drought, by the way, Dallas, Texas is at 24 days over 100 degrees. Mm-hmm. And the drought in Texas has cost $4.1 billion with a B dollars. That's $165 per person in Texas and $400 per worker. So what we're seeing is the impacts of global warming are having real economic consequences. And the question that should be on the table is, what should we do about it?
Well, how does that – so now you mentioned a lot of extremes on the heat side, but what about earlier on in May and June, we had snow in the Rockies, which was unprecedented as well, which set some records. And that is not warming by any stretch of the imagination, right?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, that's why we use the word climate change to describe what's happening with the environment as we increase carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, many things people don't think about as being an outcome. For example, and I mentioned this prior on your show, in the summer, it is more humid. There's more water in the air. There's more what is called water vapor. And because of that extra water vapor, when we get rains or when we get snow, they come in heavier downbursts. So we're likely to get heavy rainfalls or snowfalls in big bursts, which cause flooding. So most people don't think, wow, in some parts of the world, it's going to actually get wetter even as the earth on whole is warming. But it's one of those strange consequences of what we're doing to the environment. And I want to go back to this issue of what's the most cost-effective way of dealing with this. I mean, if we're costing people in Texas $400 because of this drought problem, maybe it's time to think about cheaper ways of handling the problem. And I would suggest that we start with clean and renewable energies.
So are you saying that this dramatic weather we're seeing, from the heat waves to the floods to the droughts in Texas, are all directly related to global warming? Climate change.
No, I'm not saying they're all related to global warming. Some weather patterns are more
global warming is still a legitimate thing, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Some weather patterns are more susceptible to global warming, such as droughts and floods. And let's think about, do you guys remember the terrible heat wave in Russia a few years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a technique called fractional attribution. It's a fancy word to say people study how more likely is this to occur now that we have global warming compared to not having global warming. It turns out that event was 4 times more likely to occur because of what we've done to the atmosphere. And in fact, we're seeing this around the world. We're breaking twice as many heat records as cold records in the U.S., just as we'd expect with a warming climate. So I'm not saying this event or that event is solely caused by global warming, but global warming is making a lot of the events worse and more costly, and it doesn't need to be that way.
So our oceans are warming. Our icebergs are melting. How do we know this isn't just a cyclical thing? A lot of people are saying, well, you've only really been studying global warming for the past 150 years.
Well, the people who say we've only known about the climate for 150 years are people who don't understand climate science. We can go back hundreds of thousands of years and get information about the climate, and what we're seeing is the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is unprecedented in at least 800,000 years, and the temperature rises that we're seeing and other effects are in line with what we would expect with these high levels of carbon dioxide.
We're having a conversation here with John Abraham. He's a physicist at the University of St. Thomas School of Engineering in Minnesota, frequent contributor here to America's Radio News. And John, you mentioned the fact that the people that are studying temperatures talk about that we've been only keeping records on temperatures here in the United States for the last 150 years. Of course, we all know we have access to the geological record, which also states that this amount of heating here in the world is not unprecedented. We have been this warm in the past, and that man's carbon dioxide emissions were not a contributing factor way back in the day, some 300, 400 years ago when temperatures were as warm as they were today.
Well,
how do you measure that?
Hold on just a second, Chris. 300 or 400 years ago, the temperatures were nowhere near what they are today. You find a paleoclimate scientist who agrees with that statement, and I'll take you out for lunch. I mean, that's simply baloney. But I'll tell you what, the other point you made is right. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, the Earth was warmer. Actually, millions of years ago, the Earth was warmer, and humans didn't cause that. We know that. But the question is, do we want to go back to that kind of environment? Do we want to go back to an environment where the oceans were 200 feet higher than they are today, where the oceans are more acidic, and where we had large parts of the globe that were uninhabitable? Now, I'd argue that we've adapted our society to our current climate, and if we move from that climate too far, it's going to be costly in economic terms and in human life terms.
Yeah, and again, back to our original point when we started our conversation, John, in regards to the BBC and the way they want to start covering climate change, you would not be in favor of muzzling skeptics. You want to have a nice, healthy debate, yes?
Well, I think that there should be a nice, healthy debate, but I think that giving equal time to the 3% of scientists who disagree and the 97% who agree isn't helpful. It's like giving equal time to the doctors who don't think that smoking causes cancer. So you can have both voices heard, but you've got to be appropriate to the quality of the voices and the number of those voices.
All right. Thank you, John Abraham, physicist at the University of St. Thomas School of Engineering in Minnesota. Always a pleasure. Come back soon.
Great. Thanks.